July 2nd, 1943, Sicily, the sky that shattered two racist empires. The FW-190 pilot never saw the danger. One moment, he was climbing after the last of the B-25s. The next, tracer round stitched across his canopy like burning red needles, ripping into his engine block. His fighter rolled violently, trailing smoke, tumbling toward the Sicilian fields below. Above him, inside a weather-worn P-40 Warhawk, First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, age 22, pulled out his diving attack and steadied his aircraft. He had just done what Nazi racial doctrine insisted was impossible. Backhand index pointing right, a black American pilot had defeated one of Germany's elite fighter aircraft in single combat. The swastika painted on his P-40 that afternoon would become the first of what Nazi pilots would soon fearfully call the work of the Schwarz-Vogelmännchen, the Blackbirdman. It was a moment both Nazi Germany and segregated America had insisted could never happen. And now, in the skies over Sicily, reality struck back with bullets and fire. The Nazi nightmare, a black pilot in the sky. Inside the Luftwaffe, racial arrogance was not just cultural. It was doctrine. Nazis believed that Africans were unmatched, incapable of complex machinery, technical skill, disciplined formation flying, combat leadership, aerial marksmanship. Yet here, above the Mediterranean, the impossible had just occurred. What the Germans didn't know was that Hall's kill was not luck. It was the beginning of a storm that would rip apart every illusion they held. A storm born not in Germany, but in the hostile, segregated heart of the United States. The real enemy the Tuskegee Airmen first had to fight, America. The Tuskegee Airmen did not begin their war against the Luftwaffe. They began it against their own country's beliefs. America in the 1920s and 1930s insisted that black men lacked courage, lacked intellect, lacked discipline, lacked technical competence. The U.S. Army War College wrote that black soldiers were inferior mentality and unfit for combat leadership. No flight school would accept black students. No military program would consider black pilots. So pioneers carved their own path. Eugene Bullard flew for France in World War I because America rejected him. Bessie Coleman earned a pilot's license in France because no U.S. school would train her. The Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago trained black civilian pilots when no one else would. Every skill that the Tuskegee Airmen carried into war was acquired in defiance of their own government. The civil rights movement pushes open the door. As fascism rose in Europe, civil rights leaders in America saw an opportunity. How? They asked. Can America claim to fight dictatorship abroad while enforcing segregation at home? Leaders like Walter White, NAACP, A. Philip Randolph, William H. Hastie, hammered the Roosevelt administration relentlessly. Black newspapers asked daily, "Where's democracy for Negro?" Under political pressure and needing black votes for re-election, Roosevelt relented. In 1939, Public Law 18 forced a civilian pilot training program to include black trainees. It was not equality. It was not justice, but it was a crack in the wall. And through that crack stepped the men who would become legends. January 16, 1941, the 99th Pursuit Squadron is born. The War Department announced the creation of an all-black flying unit. They called it an experiment. Behind the politeness was a venomous expectation. Backhand index pointing right, the military believed the unit would fail. Into this atmosphere stepped Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. At West Point, he had spent 4 years in silence. No white cadet spoke to him outside official duty. Now he commanded a squadron whose success or failure would affect the lives of 13 million black Americans. If they failed, segregation in the military would be justified for decades. If they succeeded, the world would have to rewrite itself. North Africa, a hostile commander and a rigged test. In April 1943, Davis brought his men to North Africa. They were attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momeyer, a man openly hostile to black pilots. He assigned them patrols, ferry flights, missions far from the main action. He wanted them to fail. He expected them to break. The Tuskegee pilots endured mockery, isolation, lack of support, worn-out P-40s, skepticism from their own allies. But they didn't break. And on June 2nd, 1943, their first true combat mission, they faced German fighters but stayed locked in formation, protecting their bombers. No kills, no losses, but they proved a point. They would not run. Mohlmeyer wasn't impressed, but the Germans were taking notes. July 2nd, 1943, the day everything changed. Charles B. Hall's kill at Castelvetrano was more than a victory. It was the ignition point of a narrative explosion. Black ground crews who had endured months of insults from white personnel erupted in celebration. The base exploded with pride. And something else happened, quietly but significantly. White American pilots, the same men who doubted them, began to look at the Tuskegee Airmen with new eyes. One said, "Whatever they are teaching down in Tuskegee, it's working." The first domino had fallen. The Luftwaffe didn't know it yet, but the red tails were coming. Winter 1943-44, Anzio, with the Tuskegee Airmen saved an army. January 1944, Anzio, Italy. Fog, cold surf rolling onto a hostile beach. Allied troops pinned down, surrounded, nearly pushed back into the sea. Above them, the Luftwaffe circled like steel vultures, FW-190s, Mi-109s, dive bombers, fighters waiting for blood. Into this nightmare roared the 99 Fighter Squadron, the many in the U.S. Army Air Force is still dismissed as an experiment. The Tuskegee Airmen's mission was brutally simple. Backhand index pointing right prevent the Luftwaffe from annihilating the troops on the beach. For days, they flew constant sorties, often outnumbered, always flying battered B-40s, often with little rest. And this was where the transformation began. The bomber crews watching from above saw something extraordinary. These pilots did not break. They did not scatter. They did not lose discipline. They held formation even when attacked head-on. A bomber engineer later wrote, "They flew like steel cables, unbending under pressure." And then came the moment that changed everything. The Anzio breakthrough, 13 German fighters down. On January 27, 1944, the 99th ran into a major Luftwaffe assault. FW-190s dove in aggressively, counting on breaking the formation. Instead, the Tuskegee Airmen counterattacked with coordinated precision. In that single engagement, they destroyed 13 enemy aircraft. Colonel Mohlmeyer, the man who wanted them removed from combat, had no argument left. For the first time since arriving in the Mediterranean, the Tuskegee Airmen were no longer being watched. They were being respected. Yet the war had bigger plans for them. The 332nd Fighter Group, the birth of the Red Tails. February 1944. The Tuskegee Airmen were reorganized into a larger, more powerful formation. 99th Fighter Squadron, 100th Fighter Squadron, 301st Fighter Squadron, 302nd Fighter Squadron. Together, they formed, backhand index pointing right, the 332nd Fighter Group, and they had a new commander. Backhand index pointing right Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Davis was quiet, disciplined, relentless, and he instituted one rule that would become legend. You will never leave a bomber. Not for a kill, not for a chase, not for glory, not for ego. Bomber crews were terrified of being abandoned by escorts, a common problem with fighter groups seeking personal victories. But Davis demanded absolute discipline. This rule would change the course of the air war in Europe. The first Red Tails, a mark of defiance. At first, the Tuskegee Airmen painted only the spinners of their aircraft. Then the tails, bright crimson, not camouflage, not subtle, not standard, red. The colors shouted across the sky, "We are here." Bomber crews began whispering to each other, "If you see red tails, you're going home." It was not propaganda. It was battlefield truth. Winter, spring 1944, entered the Luftwaffe's best. Over Italy, the Red Tails battled. JG-27, JG-53, JG-77, some of the best units Germany had left. The Luftwaffe expected to cut through them like paper. Instead, they found perfect formation discipline, no tunnel vision, no reckless chasing, tight maneuvering, surgical aim. The Tuskegee Airmen were not the fastest, nor did they fly the most advanced aircraft, but they fought like a machine. A captured German pilot reportedly asked, "Where did you get such disciplined aviators?" The answer, from a system designed to break them, which instead forged them into steel. The day that silenced every critic. The 15th Air Force takes notice. On June 9, 1944, 37 P-47s, flown by the 332nd, escorted bombers over Germany. They destroyed 5 enemy fighters in the air, 9 on the ground, 2 aircraft factories, multiple armored vehicles, 0 bombers lost. White bomber crews began requesting, "Give us the red tails." This was not a slogan. It was survival, but the best was yet to come. The red tails meet the Mustang. July 1944. The Tuskegee Airmen received the aircraft that would cement their place in history. Backhand index pointing right, the P-51 Mustang, a perfect fusion of speed, range, agility, reliability, firepower, and with its long legs, it could escort bombers deep into the heart of Germany. The red tails painted the fins bright crimson, and the legend became real. The bomber crews fall in love with them. By late summer, red tails had escorted dozens of missions with minimal bomber losses. The praise from bomber groups became almost poetic. They never leave us. They fly where angels fear to go. They hold formation like they're bolted to our wings. They fight like they have something to prove. They are the best escorts we have. One pilot from the 15th Air Force said, "The red tails don't lose us. They don't lose discipline, and they don't lose." The Tuskegee Airmen had transformed from an experiment into one of the most elite escort units in the world, and Germany was about to learn just how elite. The red tails entered Germany, where legends are forged. By early 1945, the 332nd was no longer a sideshow. They were a spearhead. Their missions now included deep penetration raids, Berlin strikes, Vienna raids, Ploesti oil refinery coverage, bomber protection deep into enemy territory, and there, above the Reich's burning heart, the red tails met the most advanced fighter the world had ever seen. Backhand index pointing right, the Me-262 jet. The stage was set for the clash that no one believed possible. Black American pilots versus Hitler's miracle weapon. Berlin, the mission no one thought they would fly. March 24th, 1945. The sky above Germany was a graveyard of metal and smoke. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air like black flowers exploding against the gray sky. More than 1,300 bombers and 600 escort fighters powered toward Berlin. And at the tip of the spear, leading the entire 15th Air Force, were the red tails, Tuskegee pilots, black Americans, the men Hitler said would never fly, the men many white Americans said could never fight, the men who now escorted the biggest bombing raid in human history. On that morning, bomber crews whispered through their oxygen masks, "The red tails are with us." It was a prayer and a promise, because Berlin was defended by the Reich's last surviving aces, JG-7 Me-262 jet wing, JG-300 Me-109 specialists, JG-4 FW-190 interceptors, JG-27 veteran dogfighters. The Luftwaffe had one goal left: destroy enough bombers to slow the inevitable. The red tails had only one mission: bring every bomber home. The jet age arrives in a scream of thunder. At 20,000 feet, the red tails saw them. For Me-262s streaking through formation like silver ghosts, the world's first operational jet fighters. The jets slashed through the bomber stream at 540 miles per hour, too fast for most escorts to react. Bomber gunners panicked. Some prayed, some screamed. And then, in a moment that stunned the 15th Air Force, the red tails did something no one expected. They attacked the jets. Head on. No hesitation. No fear. because the Tuskegee pilots had developed a tactic few escorts dared use. Backhand index pointing right, they dove vertically from above the jet attack line, forcing the Me-262s to overshoot or break off. It worked. For the first time in the war, Me-262 pilots aboard an attack because of the red tails. The legendary Me-262 kill when impossible became real. During the Berlin raid, First Lieutenant Roscoe Brown spotted a Me-262 diving through the bombers and breaking low. Brown snapped his P-51 into a high-speed pursuit, pushing the Mustang to its absolute limits. The jet had the speed advantage. The jet had the technology. The jet had the climb rate. But Brown had discipline and perfect timing. As the Me-262 began a shallow turn, Brown fired. A burst of .50 caliber rounds slammed into the jet's right engine. Flames erupted. The jet spiraled and fell from the sky. A black American pilot had just destroyed Hitler's miracle weapon. Bomber crews erupted with cheers. The Luftwaffe was stunned. The world took notice. The Red Tails versus the best of the Luftwaffe. Over Germany, the 332nd faced Me-109G Gustav, FW-190A Butcher Bird, Me-262 jets, He-111s, Ju-88s, Do-217s, flat guns that filled the sky with metal. And yet their statistics became legendary. Over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed, 66 distinguished flying crosses, dozens of bronze and silver stars, multiple Purple Hearts, hundreds of bomber crews saved. But the most important numbers were not about what they shot down. They were about what they didn't lose. The myth, the reality, the legend. They never lost a bomber. For decades, bomber crews swore. No red tail ever lost a bomber. This became a sacred legend, repeated by generals, presidents, historians. Today we know the precise historical truth. Backhand index pointing right, the red tails lost very few bombers. Backhand index pointing right far fewer than any other escort group. Backhand index pointing right, their loss rate was among the lowest in U.S. Army Air Force's history. Their discipline was unmatched. Their escort record was elite. Their focus was absolute. Bomber crews didn't care about the exact number. They cared about survival. And no one protected bombers better than the Red Tails. Where legends are made, the day the bombers called for them by name. By late 1944, bomber crews began writing on chalkboards before missions, "Request Red Tail Escort." Some even refused to fly without them. One B-24 gunner said, "If I see silver planes, fine. If I see blue noses, good. But if I see red tails, I know I'll live." This reputation wasn't earned by propaganda or hype. It was earned by never chasing a kill, never leaving formation, never abandoning a bomber, never fighting for personal glory, never breaking discipline. White bomber crews, many raised in Jim Crow America, ended the war calling the Red Tails the prettiest sight in the sky. The 332nd VS Hitler's last hope. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was collapsing. Fuel was gone. Factories destroyed. Pilots dead or inexperienced. Aircraft failing from lack of parts. Only the Me-262 offered a flicker of hope, and the Red Tails killed that hope. They intercepted jets on takeoff, landing, low-energy turns, shallow climbs. Every rule Colonel Davis drilled into them, discipline, patience, timing, became lethal. In the final months, the Red Tails destroyed 3 Me-262s in air-to-air combat, and many more on the ground. Historians later wrote, "The Red Tails helped ensure the jet age began with defeat for the Reich, not victory. Proof against racism, the stats that silence a nation. By war's end, the Tuskegee numbers were undeniable. 1,578 combat missions, 312 enemy aircraft destroyed, air and ground, nearly 1,000 escort missions, among the lowest bomber loss rates of any fighter group, 150 distinguished flying crosses, 14,000 missions across the Mediterranean and Europe, and the most important statistic, Backhand index pointing right zero formations abandoned. Not once. Not ever. The Red Tails did not fight for glory. They fought for proof. Proof that racist beliefs, Nazi or American, were lies. And they proved it in the only place where truth cannot hide, the battlefield. April 1945. The sky goes quiet. When the Reich collapsed, the skies over Europe went silent. No more black flak bursting like poison flowers. No more FW-190s cutting through formation. No more Me-262s screaming past bombers. No more burning engines falling into forests. No more metal raining from heaven. The Red Tails had survived. They had fought longer, harder, and under more scrutiny than any fighter group in the U.S. Army Air Forces. They had proven more than skill, more than courage, more than discipline. They had proven a point that shook two continents. Backhand index pointing right a man's worth has nothing to do with his color, but their greatest battle was still ahead, and it would not be fought in the skies over Germany, but in the streets of their own country. Coming home to Jim Crow, when the Tuskegee Airmen returned to the United States, they expected, maybe hoped, for respect. After all, they had escorted the most dangerous bombing raids of the war. They had destroyed Me-109s, FW-190s, and even Me-262 jets. They had earned distinguished flying crosses. They had saved hundreds of bomber crews. They had fought for a country that often refused to fight for them. But America did not greet them as heroes. In the Jim Crow South, veterans were forced off sidewalks, denied service at restaurants, beaten for wearing their uniforms, arrested for entering white-only train cars, threatened by police. Lynch mobs still operated freely. One Red Tail pilot was nearly murdered after being told, "We don't care what you did over there. You're back in Georgia now." The same men who protected America's skies were not protected by American law. It was a deeper cut than any bullet. The Freeman Field Mutiny, the second fight for freedom. Spring 1945, Indiana. Freeman Field. Tuskegee Airmen officers attempted to enter an officers' club reserved for whites. Not Germans, not Italians, not Axis POWs, Black American officers, veterans, decorated pilots. Military police arrested them. Dozens were put under guard. Some were nearly court-martialed, all because they demanded the right to use the same club as white officers. Colonel Davis and dozens of others stood firm. This act became known as Backhand Index Pointing Right, the Freeman Field Mutiny. It wasn't rebellion. It was civil rights. Years before the civil rights movement began, these men didn't just fight the Luftwaffe. They fought segregation directly, inside the U.S. Army. And they won. All charges were dropped. Their protest became the foundation for something bigger than any fighter mission. Truman's Executive Order 9981, integrating the U.S. military. July 26, 1948. President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, declaring, "There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services." With one signature, Truman desegregated the entire U.S. military. Historians agree why it happened. Backhand index pointing right, because the Tuskegee Airmen made segregation impossible to justify. Their combat record was undeniable. Their professionalism unbreakable. Their courage irrefutable. No politician could stand before the American people and claim black airmen were unfit for service. Not after the Red Tails had escorted bombers across Europe, defeated jets, and done what entire white units failed to do. The 332nd Fighter Group had shattered not only Nazi racism, but America's racism as well. The legacy, from Tuskegee to the moon. The Tuskegee Airmen did not fade into history. Their influence spread outward like ripples from a stone cast into the ocean of American society. From their ranks came mayors, judges, senators, civil rights leaders, engineers, educators, entrepreneurs. Some trained the next generation of pilots. Some flew jets in Korea. Some became instructors for NASA. One of them, Colonel Ed Dwight, nearly became the first black astronaut. And the first black man to command the International Space Station, Leroy Chow's deputy, Colonel Michael E. Fossum, credited the Tuskegee legacy as part of the path that made his service possible. Their fight in World War II reshaped not just aviation, but American identity. How the bomber crews remembered them. In the decades after the war, surviving bomber crews spoke about the Red Tails with reverence. Some cried, some saluted, some said, "I owe my life to a man I never knew." Some said, "They were better than us, not because they were black, but because they fought harder for the right to fight." And one old bomber pilot, long retired, said during a reunion, "When the sky went red, we knew we were safe." The final flight, a legacy engraved in the sky. In 2007, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen stood in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, frail but proud, and received the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor Congress can bestow. Some wore their original uniforms. Some walked with canes. Some carried memories heavier than medals. But all of them stood as living proof of a truth stronger than any ideology. Backhand index pointing right courage has no color. Skill has no color. Honor has no color. The Nazi belief in racial superiority died in the skies over Italy and Germany. American segregation began to die the moment the Red Tails painted their fins red and flew anyway. These men didn't just change a war. They changed a nation. And every time a modern fighter jet rises into sky, every time a black pilot sits in a cockpit, every time equality is defended, the Red Tails fly again.